I was 18 years old, and it had been 10 years since my father died in a tragic road accident. Since then, it had just been me and my mom in our big, old house. That night, Mom was at a friend's get-together and told me she'd be back late. So I decided to make the most of the evening and invited my friends over for a movie night. Ella, Amanda, and Sam arrived about an hour later. We got the snacks ready and ordered some food. It was supposed to be a fun night, just us hanging out and watching movies. Ella, with her love for horror, insisted we watch something truly terrifying. We all agreed, trying to act tough. The movie started off exciting, but soon it became clear that this was no ordinary horror flick. Each scene was more terrifying than the last. We all tried to hide our fear, not wanting to seem childish, but I could see the fear in their eyes. A mirror of my own. I could feel my heart pounding with every jump scare, my palms sweating as I clutched the armrest of the couch. As the movie progressed, the tension in the room grew thicker. The shadows seemed to creep closer, and every creak of the old house made us jump. My mind kept playing tricks on me, making me see things in the corners of my vision that weren't really there, but I couldn't show my fear. I had to be brave, had to keep it together for my friends. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the movie ended. We all sat there trying to act cool, but it was obvious that we were all shaken. Amanda admitted it was the scariest movie she'd ever seen, and we all agreed. We started discussing the scariest parts, trying to laugh it off, but the fear lingered. Ella got up to get some juice from the kitchen. We heard her footsteps fade away, followed by the clinking of glasses. Suddenly, her scream pierced the air. It was a blood-curdling sound that made my heart skip a beat. We all rushed to the kitchen, panic gripping us. "Ella, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. She was standing by the window, her face pale as a sheet. I saw something from the kitchen window, glowing eyes of a black, shadowy creature. My blood ran cold. We checked the window, trying to calm her down and see for ourselves. But there was nothing there, just the quiet darkness outside. We reassured her it was probably just her imagination playing tricks after the scary movie. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We went back to the living room, trying to brush off the incident, but an uneasy silence had settled over us. Then, just as we were beginning to relax, a loud knocking sound echoed through the house. We all froze, fear gripping us once more. "Did you hear that?" Sam whispered, his eyes wide with fear. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "My mom always calls before coming home. It can't be her." The knocking continued, louder and more urgent. Panic set in. Who could it be at this hour? I mustered up the courage and, with Sam by my side, approached the door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. Silence. There was no answer. The knocking continued, relentless. I exchanged a nervous glance with Sam. We were both scared out of our wits, but we had to do something. I slowly reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. Just as I was about to turn it, the knocking stopped. The sudden silence was even more terrifying. We stood there, holding our breath, waiting for something to happen. But there was nothing, just the eerie stillness of the house. We decided to check the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked. Every shadow seemed to hide something sinister, and every creak of the old house made us jump. We returned to the living room, sitting in a tight circle. The fear was palpable, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. We tried to convince ourselves it was just a prank, maybe someone trying to scare us because they knew we were watching a horror movie. But deep down, none of us really believed it. The hours dragged on, and the fear slowly subsided, replaced by an uneasy calm. We stayed together for the rest of the night, not wanting to be alone. Every little noise made us jump, and every shadow seemed to move. The fear had turned into something almost tangible, a presence in the room with us. Even now, I'm not sure what we saw or heard that night. But I do know one thing. Some shadows are best left alone, because sometimes the real horror isn't on the screen. It's right outside your door. The memories of that night still haunt me, a reminder that some things are better left unexplored. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison of fear. We never talked about that night again. but I know we all remember it. The night we watched the scariest movie ever and faced something far more terrifying in the shadows of my own home.
I was 17 years old, and it had been a strange day. My parents had left to visit my uncle, who had a bad road accident while driving his truck. This left me home alone in our old house. It was the first time I was alone for such a long period, and at first, I enjoyed the solitude. I spent the afternoon glued to my phone, scrolling through social media, playing games, and chatting with friends. But after a while, the novelty wore off, and I grew bored. Deciding to make use of my time, I figured I could declutter my room. I started sorting through my drawers, throwing out old papers, and rearranging my books. While doing so, I remembered a bag full of my old pictures and childhood memorabilia that I had always wanted to go through. It was stored somewhere in the attic. The attic always had a creepy vibe, and I usually avoided it. But today, driven by boredom and nostalgia, I decided to face my fear. I made my way to the attic, every step echoing in the quiet house. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, sending a shiver down my spine. The attic was dark and musty, filled with old furniture and boxes covered in dust. I rummaged through the clutter, shifting boxes and old furniture. Finally, I found it, a dusty old bag hidden in a corner. I opened it and was instantly transported back to my childhood. There were toys I had long forgotten, old currency notes, collectibles, and most importantly, photographs. I sat there for what felt like hours, drowning in the memories those items brought back. As evening turned into night, I realized how quiet and dark the house had become. The only light in the attic was a dim bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A creepy feeling started to settle over me. The attic, which had always given me the chills, felt even more oppressive now that I was alone. A thought struck me hard. How did I manage to come up here alone? I usually couldn't even think of stepping foot in the attic when everyone was home. Now here I was, in the very place that terrified me the most. My heart began to pound and I found myself frozen with fear. The quiet of the attic seemed to grow louder, each creak and groan of the old house amplifying my anxiety. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I decided it was time to leave. As I made my way back, halfway down the attic stairs, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was music, soft, classical music playing from the attic. My body went rigid with fear. There shouldn't be anyone else in the house. The music was coming from a record player that had been stored up there for years. Panic surged through me, and I bolted down the stairs, not daring to look back. I ran to my room and slammed the door shut, my back pressed against the wall, trembling. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the fear that had settled in my chest told me otherwise. I sat there, my mind racing. Something was off about that evening. I felt an unsettling presence in the house. I was alone, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The music from the attic continued to play, its haunting melody filling the silence. As the night wore on, I remained huddled in my room, every noise making me jump. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and the house creaked as if it was alive. I could feel eyes on me, an unseen presence that made my skin crawl. Hours passed, but the fear didn't fade. I kept my phone close, my fingers hovering over the emergency call button. I thought about calling my parents, but what would I tell them? That I was scared of the attic music? They'd probably just tell me it was my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The music eventually stopped, but the eerie silence that followed was even worse. I couldn't sleep. I sat there, wide awake, until the first light of dawn broke through the windows. When my parents finally returned, I tried to tell them about the music, the fear I felt, but they just brushed it off as a product of my overactive imagination. They didn't understand the terror I experienced that night. Even now, the memory of that night haunts me. I avoid the attic at all costs. The thought of what happened up there, the music playing on its own, the feeling of not being alone, still sends chills down my spine. I'll never know what truly happened that night, but one thing is certain. That house, my home, was never the same for me again.
My name is Lucy, and I live in a small village. It was a cold December day when my parents decided to drive to the city for their monthly shopping. It was a 2-hour drive, but I was fine with being alone. I never really felt scared. I spent the evening watching DIY art and craft videos on my phone while eating noodles. The cozy warmth of our house contrasted sharply with the biting winter chill outside. As I was lost in my crafts, a sudden knock on the door broke my concentration. It was unusual for anyone to visit me, especially at this hour. Curiosity and a hint of apprehension gripped me as I approached the door. I called out, "Who is it?" A man's voice responded, "I'm Frederick, your dad's friend. Open the door." I hesitated. I had never heard of a Frederick from my dad. I knew all of his friends, and this name was unfamiliar. I replied, "My dad isn't home right now. If you need to speak to him, you can call him." The man's voice came back, more insistent. "I got a call from the hospital. They said your dad has had an accident and is in bad shape. You need to come with me." My heart stopped. The thought of my parents in trouble filled my eyes with tears. I thought this might be why they were late. I was about to unlock the door when a thought struck me. It would be better to call my dad directly and confirm. With trembling hands, I dialed his number. The phone rang a few times before he picked up. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm sorry we're running late. We should be home in about 20 minutes. Are you doing okay?" Relief washed over me at the sound of his voice. "Dad, I'm fine. I was worried. There's a man at the door saying you had an accident and that I need to go with him. He says his name is Frederick." There was a brief pause, then my dad's voice turned serious. "Lucy, listen to me carefully. Do not open the door for anyone. We don't know anyone named Frederick. Lock all the doors and windows and stay inside. We'll be home soon." Panic surged through me. Who was this man standing outside, and why had he lied to me? I glanced towards the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. The sinister reality of the situation hit me hard. I was alone, and someone was trying to trick me into opening the door. I quickly secured all the locks and checked the windows, making sure everything was secure. I could hear the man outside, still trying to convince me to open the door. His voice was calm, almost soothing, but I knew better now. I sat on the couch, every noise in the house amplified by my fear. The wind howled outside, and the branches of the old oak tree scraped against the windows, making eerie sounds that seemed to echo the tension in my heart. I hugged my knees to my chest, shivering, not just from the cold, but from the terror of the unknown. Minutes felt like hours. I kept glancing at the clock, willing my parents to come home faster. The man's attempts to get in gradually stopped, but the silence that followed was even more unnerving. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. Finally, I heard the familiar sound of our car pulling into the driveway. I rushed to the window and saw my parents getting out, relief flooding through me. I opened the door just as they were about to unlock it themselves and threw myself into their arms, tears streaming down my face. My dad held me tight, his voice soothing. "It's okay, Lucy. We're here now. You're safe." I explained everything that had happened, and my dad's face grew darker with concern. We called the local authorities, but by the time they arrived, the man was long gone. The police took my statement and promised to patrol the area more frequently. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the man. Who was he, and what were his intentions? The thought of what could have happened if I had opened the door haunted me. Our village, once a place of comfort and safety, now felt shadowed by an unknown threat. Even though my parents were back, and the house was once again filled with warmth and security, I knew things had changed. I had learned a hard lesson that day about trust and caution. The memory of the stranger at the door and his chilling deception stayed with me, a reminder that even in the safest places, danger can sometimes come knocking.